All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Monica Wang. I'm an associate professor of community health sciences at the Boston University School of Public Health and associate director of narrative at the Center for Anti-Racist Research. Next slide. One of the frameworks I'll be using today is from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And this is a really helpful framework for academics on rethinking how we can communicate our research to the public. As academics, we are trained to provide background information and go really in depth with supporting details. And our results and conclusions typically don't come in the format of a manuscript until the very end. However, when we're addressing misinformation, such as during the age of COVID-19, when we're also in an era of information saturation, it's really critical to start off with the bottom line or the headline first. There are many different kinds of media that individuals consume, and especially with the ubiquity of social media, it's really difficult for those who aren't trained in research or the sciences to discern what is the main takeaway. One suggestion for how to grab audiences' attention is to really come away with the conclusion and present that at the very beginning. The rest of the ways in which we can actually combat misinformation are to provide why it's important for a particular takeaway and then what the supporting details are. So flipping the original way in which academics are trained. Next slide. Another way to combat misinformation is really to ground the ways in which we're speaking to other audiences or writing for other audiences in values. And that involves understanding what values are. In general, values are basic and fundamental beliefs that guide or motivate individuals' attitudes or actions, like whether or not they sign up for a COVID-19 vaccine. And individuals' values or group dynamic values help understand and help determine what is important for a particular group. And using this framework, which is adopted from the Liz Mann strategy, what this framework provides us with is, instead of looking at audience demographics or voting behaviors, this framework looks at the audience's dominant values and mindsets. And so when we look at the community quadrant, this is mostly comprised of liberals and contains social justice and a progressive base. The achievement quadrant is majority conservatives and contains the opposition. The last two quadrants, autonomy and security, are generally considered different kinds of persuadable audiences. And grounding different groups in this particular framework allows people of all different genders and races, ethnic backgrounds, socioeconomic status to be found within any of these value-based quadrants. And it's also important to note that the borders are porous and people can dance across the values map, especially when it comes to different kinds of decision-making. We see this particularly relevant for different kinds of health behaviors, because people may perceive one particular set of behaviors, for example, diet and physical activity, as protective or risky, but they may be more conservative or more liberal when it comes to other kinds of behaviors, such as mitigating infectious disease spread. This framework serves as a reminder that not everyone shares our own individual mindset, and that this is really important when we're framing it. Next slide. So what can we do about health misinformation? One critical way that is a useful tool and can be done relatively quickly is in the form of an op-ed. And op-eds are one form of science communication that allows individuals who are experts in a particular area to publish an opinion that is meant to create thought and discussion among readers. The basic anatomy of an op-ed is first starting off with a news hook. There has to be something that grabs the reader's attention. In many ways, this comes in the format of a story. Humans are really drawn to connection and to stories with one another. And in an age where there's numerous kinds of data or tables that people can consume, a really important way and a really engaging way is starting off with an individual story. The second piece is, what's your position? And that is, what is the takeaway? What is the upfront message? And then your argument or the body of the op-ed is typically grounded in a few key points. The fourth piece that's really critical for an op-ed is to have a to be sure or some kind of statement or some kind of short paragraph that addresses counter arguments, acknowledges limitations, and preempts critics. And then your conclusion draws it back to full circle, ties it back to your lead. Next slide. So how do you get started, especially if you haven't been able to take a workshop and haven't been accustomed to writing op-eds? The first is, what are you passionate about? There's nothing that's going to slow down your writing more than writing about something that you don't care about. But if there's a topic or an issue or a group or a current event that really sparks your interest, that's probably the greatest catalyst for writing a successful op-ed. The second key point is really understanding what your specific point of view is. And this goes beyond just your formal expertise. So beyond your training as an academic, what are your lived experiences as a partner to someone, whether that's a healthcare provider, as a parent to children who are going through COVID-19 and school at the same time? What's your perspective as a neighbor or somebody else who has a different experience that many people can connect with? And that's another kind of informal expertise that allows you to connect with the reader and for them to understand you as a person. Other key things about how to get started is really understanding who your audience and what speaks to them. So thinking through at the very beginning, what is the kind of outlet that I'm likely going to publish in? And what are the different kinds of audiences that are likely to read that outlet? The last few points are embrace the personal. Don't be afraid to share details to still tell stories and build connection, and acknowledge that there are other perspectives and experiences. If you come from the perspective that focuses on shaming or blaming other groups for not behaving in a certain way, that's a surefire way to prevent your message from those who might be in those persuadable quadrants. Next slide. And if you want to learn more, this is a publication that I senior authored that came out earlier last year. It's on science communication in the age of misinformation. It was a great team effort alongside some other BU faculty here, Professor Jennifer Beard and Professor Ellie Murray. Thank you very much, and I'll hand it over to the next speaker.